Good evening, Flagstaff, and welcome back to what may be the final evening of our Kwanzaa celebration, but is certainly far from our last celebration of the principles we've been examining, celebrating, and cherishing this Kwanzaa. We begin by saying to all who are joining us, whether here in Flagstaff, across the state, across the nation, and even around the world, Heriza Kwanzaa, joyous Kwanzaa to you. This has been such a special Kwanzaa celebration, particularly as we embrace the 2021 Kwanzaa theme of practicing Kwanzaa and the seven principles and ensuring the well being of the world. In this celebration, we are reminded that the principles we celebrate this season are not restricted to the 7 days of Kwanzaa, but they are lifestyle choices and changes we can choose to embrace 365 days a year, starting today, January 1st, what we traditionally celebrate as New Year's Day. We also recognize the history of this day, not only around the world, but particularly in the community of Africans bound to enforced enslavement in this nation, who refer to this day not as a day of exaltation, but as hiring day or heartbreak day, when families living in enslavement anticipated separation as owners balanced their books. We look to this as a reminder, um, as both a heartbreaking reality for our people's past, but also as a cause for joy in our community as we continue to remember, recognize, and rejoice in the resiliency of our people. And so we come to this day, day 7, with the memory of the foundation we've built over the past 6 days. We began with day 1, Umoja, a call for unity in our community and the challenge to strive for and maintain unity in our families, in our communities, our nation, and our collective people. Day 2, we learned to build unity through Kujichagulia, self-determination, the promise to define ourselves, name ourselves, create for ourselves, and speak for ourselves. On day 3, we reminded ourselves that we define ourselves through Ujima, collective work and responsibility, and committed to the building and maintaining of our community together and to making our community's problems our problems and solving them together. Day 4 gave us the responsibility of Ujama, cooperative economics, that reminds us that working together as community also means building and maintaining our own stores, shops, and other businesses, and profiting from them together. On day 5, we reminded ourselves of Nia, our purpose, that the foundation of all our collective works is our collective vocation of building and developing our community to restore our people to our traditional greatness. We achieve this restoration through the principle of day 6, Kuumba, creativity, the call to do always as much as we can to leave our community more beautiful and more beneficial than we inherited it. Today, we remember that by which we've come this far, Imani, faith, the call to believe with all our hearts in our people and the righteousness and victory of our struggle. I'm honored to present you with our presenter today, our host for all the preceding days of our celebration, Reverend Dr. Bernadine Lewis, who is going to guide us through a discussion of faith before we enter into a celebratory conversation with many other wonderful guests who have joined us this Kwanzaa to discuss how we move forward and continue our 365-day celebration into 2022. Miss Bernadine, welcome.
Thank you. Happy Kwanzaa and happy New Year.
Yes.
We're in 2022. Thank you for being our Kwanzaa hostess. I still like saying hostess um, this evening. And thank you for the introduction. Um, I guess I'll go right ahead and jump right into Imani, which, by the way, is another Nia, is a very common and popular name for children in the African American um, culture, and so is Imani, both a common African and African American name. And as you have already stated, it means faith. Thank you for reminding us that that principle um, is calling us, just to put it out there again, because I want to build on that. Shall I see you on the other side, or do you want to stay on?
It's up to you. Either way is fine with me.
I feel like I'm talking to you, and I know I'm talking to everyone. Um, so you mentioned that to believe with all of our hearts in our people and the righteousness and victory of our struggle. And so, in preparing to lead this discussion, I think anyone who is in the Black or African American culture, when we hear the word faith, we are automatically swept to our places of worship. And so I have never, when I answered the call to ministry, I ran away from, because I knew I was not a preacher, but I knew that one of those callings was to be a teacher. And so I just want to kind of challenge our faith. I want to take a few moments this evening during this celebration to challenge our faith. And when I say faith in this incident, I mean our how we choose um, to live our spiritual lives. So whatever, if you're in a certain denomination, or be it if you're a Christian or Muslim, um, or Buddhist, anyway, that is your faith. And so that's what I want to challenge this evening. And more so, I want to hone in on our spiritual growth. That is what I would like to challenge with this discussion this evening. But I am going to use the biblical scripture to kind of help guide us through this discussion. And I want to start with 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 2, where it says that I have fed you with milk and not with solid food. For until now, you were not able to receive, and even now, you're still not able to receive. So, if we just quickly broke this down, because we don't want this to get into a Sunday sermon, um, when you're first getting into your faith, into your spiritual walk with whomever you acknowledge as creator, um, you're taking baby steps, because the baby steps are, whatever your faith is calling you to do, or is saying or reminding you, this is what we must do in order to be closer to whomever we call creator. So that's your milk. So whereas uh, I am called to pray 6 times a day at the beginning of your spiritual walk, you might be like, nope, I'm good if I can do 30 minutes or an hour a day, which is typically what Christians are called to, 1 hour a day. So, and then you build upon that as you mature in your spiritual growth. So, if we go further and we look at um, the scriptures again, and we're still in First Corinthians, and so we're going to move, I think, uh, chapter 14, verse 20. It says, brothers, Do not be children in your thinking. So here it is, we're still, seeing or hearing or learning about how there is a progression even in our spiritual life. So we're being admonished. Do not be children in your thinking. Be infants in evil. So when it comes to starting confusion and chaos, be an infant, don't really know how to do that, in other words. But in your thinking, be mature. And so as I meditated on that, and I looked at our principle and how we are to practice Imani, how we are to practice faith, I want to pull out that word belief. And if you go into defining what belief is, it's an attitude that is the case. That's how it's defined, at least in divinity school. That's what we're told. It's an attitude that is the case. So someone has told you, and you just accept it. That is what it is. But it is very interesting when you delve deeper into that we find that philosophers use the term belief to refer to attitudes about the world which can be either true or false. So, not necessarily take it as this is the case, it is this. So, in not wanting to devote a lot of time to this, but I do want to point out that community is about, I think we would all agree, community is about growth and elevation. Everything that we've shared and celebrated this week, it's about our growth not only as individuals but as a community. And as you grow, you elevate and you're able to progress and you're able to accomplish more. And so if we as a people, if we've been singing this old Negro spiritual, and you mentioned it, Sister Khara, about we've come this far by faith, leaning and trusting on the Lord. And I can see my aunts, they would lean over when they would sing this, and they still do. So I'm challenging us because now, if we are maturing, if we have matured in our spiritual lives, by now we should know, we should see, because we have seen, we have lived through our experiences. And our maturity in our spiritual lives should now have us at a place of knowing, of knowingness. Because now, since the beginning of our experiences as enslaved people, as fighting for civil rights, we're fighting for to literally stay alive because we're persecuted and hunted down and assassinated just because of the color of our skin. We should know by now that what our coming together as a community, as a people, what that coming together can achieve, when what we should know and be able to speak to what happens when we come together under our common good. And I mean, we saw what Dr. King was able to accomplish. We saw what Malcolm X, peace be upon him, could accomplish. We saw what Moses or Marcus, we saw what Moses could accomplish, but we saw what Marcus Moses Garvey could accomplish. We saw what the Black Panther Party could accomplish. We see what the Black churches in a community can come together and accomplish. So now we have this evidence that it's no longer unseen, and I'm saying that because we know we all can quote the scripture. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. But we have seen now. We have the evidence. We know what freedom and liberation looks like. If we could bring back Sister Mother Harriet Tubman, she could tell you, and we know how many slave narratives or enslaved narratives. So we know what freedom and liberation looks like and what it feels like. And so now that we no longer have to hope for our victory. And I had an uncle who used to say hope is what killed us, because hope, we were sitting and waiting and watching and hoping and praying. But we weren't working, and not saying that there's anything wrong with hope. It has its place in the infancy or maybe even the toddler stages of your spiritual life. But once we mature, that hope by now should have transitioned or grown into expectation. And so now we should not just be sitting around hoping and praying. We should be speaking about our expectation to have victory, to overcome the struggle. And so when I hear in 1 Peter, the 2nd chapter, verse 9, when it says, you have been chosen, you are a chosen people, called into a royal priesthood. Well, if I have been called into the royal family of the Most High, I don't have to hope. My faith now can go into a level of expectation, because if we like to say, if I am a child of God, but even that, we have to grow. So now we should say that we are men and women of God. The Most High even says that ye are gods. And so because I know this, now I have no doubt, and we should have no doubt. It should be very firmly planted in the very essence of our being that our people are above and not beneath. And I know that we are the head and not the tail. And we should know that we are overcoming. Yes, there was a time, and my parents were in that time, and my dad sat with King, and the conversation was, we shall overcome. Well, now, if we are mature in our walk, in our spiritual walks, now we should know that we are overcoming. And that we should know that we can have what we say, because that is a part of the faith. But if you're not speaking it, if you're not growing in your faith, then you do not know that life and death is in the tongue. So we can have what we say. And so that is why we should be saying we are overcoming. And so we know that we must grow up. It's time to grow up, to mature. And and in that growing, when you are mature in your spiritual life, then you know that there is a work that has to be done. That's what it means. And I pray my niece is watching this, because we had the conversation recently about, I don't like the adulting, I'm really not feeling this, and she tried to pull you in it too, Sister Khara. And but there's work to be done. I used to tease my father. I, he was an old Baptist deacon, the son of a old Baptist preacher. I'm the granddaughter of a Baptist preacher. And I said, when you get to heaven and it talks about all the gold and the streets of gold and the rubies and the emeralds and the pearls, and I was a jeweler, and I said, Dad, who do you think takes care of that? And he looked at me, and I said, you really think in your next life, when you pass away, you're just going to go to heaven and not have anything to do? You'll just be floating around? And he would laugh. I said, we work here, and the scripture says, as it is on earth, as it is in heaven, as it is on earth, as it is above, so it is below. And so, yes, adulting means that we have work to do. Even in your spiritual life, we cannot remain children. We cannot continue to drink milk. At some point, you have to eat meat. You have to grow. And with that growth, there becomes that responsibility that we talk about. And so the work is the practice of Kwanzaa, the practice of the principles, not just these 7 days, but 365 days, so that we can be restored to our rightful places. And as the Most High said, that is the royalty, the priesthood of not only this earth, because he gave man dominion over the earth. I think sometimes we're probably laughed at when we're praying for the Most High to come and fix it. And the Most High in his response is saying, but I gave you dominion over the earth. You fix it. So it is upon us. And so when you know your place, you don't have to think. You don't have to wonder. You don't have to be iffy. When you decide to grow in this spiritual life, then you know who you are, you know whose you are, and because of who we are in the Creator, the power, the might, the wisdom that comes with that. And so there is a reason why um, we were enslaved. And it is quite apparent that someone knows our history, knows our essence better than we do. We've always been great. And the plan was for us to forget. And they wanted us to forget. And so that's another teaching for another time. But from 1966 to now, today, 2022, at this point, Imani should be our knowing, our knowingness that our people have, can, will, and are walking in their greatness. The struggle is just merely a distraction. It's an illusion to keep us from practicing these principles 365 days. of the year. And it was meant to keep us hoping rather than working and rather than living the Kwanzaa principles. And so I close with the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey when he said, "Up ye mighty race and conquer what you will." Thank you.
Thank you. I want to start with giving Sister Destiny a little credit in the conversation that we had, in that I think that maybe what she pinpointed in that conversation we were talking about, for our audience's sake, the not wanting to, like, adulting is just so hard, and not wanting to have to adult. And I wonder if she was also honing in on that difference between adulting and maturing, between working and doing work, which I think are two very different things. When we talk about, I think what it comes down to is embracing that idea of purpose. So, my question would be, how do we ensure that we are doing work and embracing purpose rather than just working, which is, when we get into those monotonous cycles of we keep doing the same things over and over again and wondering why we're not getting anywhere. Um, what's the difference, or how do we really embrace doing the work that we're supposed to be doing? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. When you reference the work, are we talking about the what we grow up to do as our life's purpose, or are we talking about the collective work that we should be doing to uphold and advance the culture, our
Mhm.
people? Which, because those are two very different things. So which work are you speaking of?
I think for the sake of this, it's really that collective work, because but that does raise a different question for me, is how we recognize the difference between that, because I think especially now in this time when we're talking about the Great Resignation and folks quitting jobs left and right, I'm wondering if maybe that is people recognizing the difference between their work, the job that they're doing, and the work, which is that more community focused purpose, and discovering, this is what my life is meant for, versus this is what my job is asking me to do.
So I miss um, christenings, and this is to answer the question. I miss the traditional christenings, when, yes, the babies are presented or given back to the ancestors, to the Most High, and at the same time, it is spoken over their lives what they shall be. And I miss the elders in the community who would help grow you and nurture you and put you on the path that you were supposed to be on. And I chose, and I use my life as an example. I grew up, I always knew that I wanted to be in business, and I wanted the business to center around fashion. I just love designing. I love the feel of fabric, and I love the feel of pearls and jewelry, and I love baubles. But at the same time, the elders were saying, you have to teach. You're meant to teach.
Mhm.
Um, and so thus, and by grace to have been able to do both at different parts of my life. So what we're missing now is the elders in the community who bless the children and get them on the path. You're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a police officer, you're going to be a teacher, a school principal, you're going to be a banker, a business person. We're missing that. So now we do end up with jobs, and not that jobs can be bad. Thank you. Then this is by grace of the creator, because if we use the job correctly, it can help you discover what it is that you really want to do and should be doing. What is your purpose? What have you been called to do? So jobs can be good. And all of this is about perspective and how we choose to view this. And when if you choose to view the job as this is just a stepping stone, this is not for the rest of my life, I don't retire from this, I'm going to use, okay, I got some downtime at work and I work with the computer, I can look at some other options that are out there for me. But rather than looking at it as drudgery and, oh, I hate this job, look at what can you get out of it and where can it take you next, and who might you meet that is going to help steer you to where it is that you ultimately need to be. And in doing that, those skills, those gifts, because I prefer those are gifts, that's what you bring to the community to do the collective work. And so it just flows, whatever gifts you've been blessed with, and it's helping you to keep a roof over your head, to keep food on the table. Those are the same gifts that we meet up at the Murdoch Center to say, here is what I have to contribute. I'm not being asked to do anything outside of who and what I am. I'm just being asked to show up as my authentic self with the gifts that have been nurtured and still are being nurtured and developed. So does that answer the question?
It does. Thank you. We spoke a couple of days ago about the words of Mary Bethune, and it seems appropriate to return to her now as we talk about both faith and purpose together. She said at one point that the measure of our progress as a race is in precise relation to the depth of faith in our people held by our leaders. So, what does it mean for us or for our community leaders to have faith in ourselves as a people?
My leader is no greater than myself. Mm. My leader, and then I'm going to use my sister, Dr. Coral. She's not greater than any of us. She's just been placed in a position to do the work, but we're supposed to be surrounding her and supporting her in that position. We all are great, and see, this is where we lost it. That's why um, Reverend Abernathy and all of those that surrounded Dr. King, Mr. Lewis, John Lewis, and Benjamin Lewis. That's why they were able to say, you go do this, because we know the history. They all were doing something in the struggle, in the civil rights movement. So it just happened that Dr. King and Dr. Coral, they get the press coverage. They take the darts, the fiery darts, in Dr. King's life. He took the bullet. But we all, because if we all have been grown and nurtured by our community and by the elders in that community, then we all are great and we all should be prepared to step up, to step in and contribute to the struggle, to the collective work. Did I answer that?
You did. Thank you.
Okay.
I love that. And really, I think that's a great point for us to bring in our other guests for this evening and to continue a broader conversation. So we have joining us Ms. Deb Harris, our community chiefess, Dr. Coral Evans, and Dr. Treya Allen. And welcome to each of you as we enter into a conversation about Kwanzaa, about community and purpose. And I want to pick up actually right where Ms. Bernadine just left off and talking about the potential for greatness in everyone. And a quote was just shared from Dr. King that said, "Not everybody can be famous, but everybody can be great, because greatness is determined by service. You only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love." So the first question that I want to dive into is just recognizing the fact that everyone on the screen right now, at one point or another, reflected on a sense of responsibility to our community, to the sisterhoods and brotherhoods we found in this place and all the places we call home and so forth. One thing that's really stood out to me is the difference between our cultural recognition of greatness and what it means to lead in community, and those of others outside of our community, is that where others often see that as they fall into the savior trap, where they say, you know, it's my call to save. We see it as a call to serve. So how do each of you define service? How do we separate it from the idea of subservience? Because we're not saying that in service we are lesser than, we're saying that that service is a move towards greatness and serving each other and lifting each other up. But how do you see that as the responsibility within our community? I'll start with Ms. Deb.
Okay. Ooh, let me see if I can try and answer this. For me, service is not something that I think I think it's something that for me, it just happens. Um, you know, I intend to help people and to do good and to be of service to other people, but I don't think I consciously thought about it. I think it was just something that kind of just happened. Um, Part of it is my nature, I think, to want to serve, um, and I shy away from being served. I have to get better at that, but I shy away from people providing service to me. But I'm always wanting to provide service to others. And so I think that for me, it's, you know, um, it's, it's, it's something that I do gladly, you know, and I have a glad heart about it. Um, and maybe it's kind of selfish because it makes me feel good. It makes me think that, what makes me feel like I'm contributing to the to the collective, you know, that I am doing this collective work that you all talked about earlier when I'm serving. And so I think that for me, that's what it is. It's something that I'm called to do. I feel compelled to serve.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's yeah. Okay. I think I'll stop there.
Uh, Dr. Evans, I'm going to come to you and actually not challenge, but just go back to one of the things Ms. Deb just said about that potentially being selfish. I'm wondering how you see that, if it's not somehow a bit more selfless in that sense of service, to be recognizing that by serving other people and helping them to see their own potential, is that part of your motivation in being a leader in the community, is recognizing that by serving others and bringing them up along with you, you're doing something greater than if the focus was only on yourself or your own like self promotion?
So first of all, I just have to say that Miss Deb is one of the most selfless people that we have here in Flagstaff. She's extremely humble. She spends a lot of time behind the scenes, pushing the rest of us forward. So I would say that definitely service comes out of love. And I want to say sometimes that love is also tough love, right? We really don't talk enough about that. And I'm hoping that we do get into that conversation because sometimes, part of being of service and part of helping other people grow is to say no, right? That's part of loving somebody is look at them and say, I love you, but no, right? That is not what we're going to do. That's a bad idea, or you just did wrong and you need to apologize. I think that for me, I serve my community because my community is the reason why I'm here. I told my story during the night that I was on. And if it hadn't been for a community that truly believed in my mom, who was a single parent, who was disabled, who had 2 kids, that brought food and clothes and opportunities to participate in different educational and recreational opportunities, we would not be here, right? And I think that it's very important that we give back, that you give back to your community when at all possible, because you need to, I know they talk about paying it forward, but also it's about making sure that you're giving back to where you are from and not forgetting where your roots are at. I think a lot of times when we talk about why aren't people serving or why is this happening or who's responsible for this, there's a quote by someone that says, if not us, then who, right? We're going to sit here. And I think that Reverend Lewis just hit it on the head when she talked about the difference between hope and faith, right? When she talked about the fact that now we need to be doing. There's that story about the guy who has been told there's a flood coming, right? And, someone walks up and gives him the notice, hey, there's a flood coming. You probably should leave. And he's busy praying. And then someone rolls up on a rowboat and says, hey, you want to get in? There's a serious flood coming. Then next, like there's the power boat, and then there's a helicopter, and then the guy ends up drowning because, the flood. And when he gets to heaven, he's like, hey, how come you didn't save me? And God's like, sent somebody to knock on your door, sent a rowboat, sent a power boat, sent a helicopter. At any time, you needed to have taken some action. So those are really my thoughts about service. It's up to us as a collective to fix things and not to sit here and wait for other people to do it. We have to take some personal responsibility. Now, there is a caveat, though, and I just want to share it real quick. When I talk to my kids, the different youth group and young people, I tell them, and I think this goes back to tough love, too. It's your responsibility if you're first to make sure that you get that ceiling busted or you get that door open, that you duct tape it all the way up, put some rocks in it, okay, so it can't close again. But it is not your responsibility to stand there and hold that door open for the rest of your life, because we need for you to get to the next point so you can get that door open for the next group of people coming, right? And you can't necessarily drag everybody across the threshold at the time you want them to come, but you can always go back and give back and talk to them about what's on the other side so that they get out of that cave, the cave that people talk about. So just step out and see what's out there.
Thank you for that. Dr. Allen, I want to come to you because you spoke beautifully on the day that you presented about radical love and how service contributes to that as well. So I'm curious just to your thoughts about what it means within our community to serve and to embrace that idea of service over saving. What does the difference there look like for you?
Absolutely. I think that anyone who does whatever work, right? I think we all have different lanes, and the beauty about being in service to a community is that I don't have to have all the answers, but I do need to show up in the things that I have been tasked to do. Now, when we serve, whatever that service looks like, whether it be public office, whether it be supporting single parents quietly, right? Because that's the other thing. We shouldn't be out here being like, look who I served. And I'm just going to put it on Instagram really, really quickly to then get clout, right, for that service. But the difference between service as in to our community and then saving a community is simply this. Do I want to be recognized, or do I want to be empowered, or do I want my community to continue to flourish, to continue to move forward, right? And part of that, here's the key difference, is understanding that I may not get there with you, but I've seen the vision and I'm willing to lend my hands to this vision, understanding that I also have a responsibility beyond the four walls of my house. So I think that's one of the key definitions there. Now, when we get into saviorism, I think that the main goal there is to be seen. And that's really not service at all. It's voyeurism. You already assume that this community doesn't have the ability or the skills. You recognize this community. Actually, I just saw this the other day. You recognize whatever community that you're saving, you recognize them as being something less than human, infantile almost, without the ability to reason for themselves, right? And so we come in and we say, hey, I'm here, whether it be missionary trips or humanitarian aid, to tell you about your experiences and to make sense of them for you. I'm not really there to try and preserve the cultural perpetuity, right, that has existed well beyond me. I'm not here for all that. What I'm here to do, it's like a form of voyeurism. I want people to see what I'm doing. I also am positioning other people below me as well. But when we start thinking about like the true definition of service is to understand that I am tasked, that I have been given a gift. In the Christian church, we say we are given gifts and talents, right? So our gifts are for other people, right? So if I have the gift of speech where someone else does not, then it becomes my responsibility to use that gift in pursuit of liberation for others and building up others. And that may mean that I have to give up opportunities where my talents are for me, right? And so if we're not understanding the difference between gifts and talents and how they operate, then we'll probably never understand the difference between service and saviorism. Like we are all flawed human beings. We should not be trying to save anybody, but we should be lending our hands, the things that are within our hands, to ensure that the community continues to go. There's no way that I could be sitting here at this table at this time doing this work with this degree in this body, right, without those who came before me, who provided service and were working to make sure that there was a blueprint for me to follow, and not even follow. I'm gonna go out here and say for me to launch from. Because there's also this thing when we start talking about service, because we don't understand cultural perpetuity, or some of us don't understand cultural perpetuity, we'll say things like, I'm not my mother's generation. And you are absolutely right, because I do not have the patience or the grace to endure, so that my own children, to endure what was happening, to make sure that my children, this community, continue to go. I tell people all the time, I don't know that I could have been around in the 60s. The Lord knew what he was doing by having me like planted firmly in 79 and like the last 4 months of 79, right? But we aren't this past generation. And I think it's also important for us to understand that the reason why we can sit here and pontificate about things, whether in the media or in our like soapboxes, is because of a generation that came before us that were willing to lay down their lives in order to make sure that Treya could soar, right? And that to me is the definition of service. Am I using my gifts towards making sure that this next generation has a launching pad? I fully expect my children to go beyond me, and the children that I birth and the children that I work with. I am fully making sure that they learn from my mistakes. I am fully utilizing the things that are within my hands or endeavoring to do so that when we do think about service, that service then doesn't just become a task that we're doing. It actually becomes an act of radical love, because I want to make sure that the next generation, that those who, other single mothers in my generation, even when we say things like, hey, do this, not this, let me give you this mother wit that I did not have when I was in your situation. All of these things come together and they form this basis of love that allows people to kind of fly instead of digging it out of the mud. So that's what I was thinking of. And I was trying to like encapsulate it. It just didn't come out like the way that I heard it in my head, but that's what I think.
It came out beautifully. I'm speaking your book into existence this year. Seriously, I need a Dr. Treya Allen book. Reverend Lewis, there are comments coming into the chat that I want to acknowledge, and I want to focus in on the first one from one of our audience members, Reverend Corey Moore, who said, "We often feel good from service to others because the divine would like us to continue the practice." And I want to take that statement back to something that you were sharing during your presentation about the fact that we have seen now the evidence of what we once only hoped for as a people. And I'm curious your thoughts on what that means for what we're now called to as a community, in that calling to serving one another as part of this community and raising each other up. We often cite the scripture that says that faith without works is dead. So how do we take that and apply it to the work that we're doing for our community? What are we called to do, or what is our responsibility now that we've seen where our ancestors and family members have brought us to? What does that tell us of our responsibility now for the community that we're in and the generations to come?
Well, we're not at the promised land yet. And I would even go so far. I'm trying to tell people stop. And that's what I was sharing about my father. Yeah, heaven can be right here on earth. The promised land is right here in Arizona, in Flagstaff, down in Phoenix with Sister Treya. And so the faith now is the work. Dr. King saw it. It already existed. So here again, we already know. We're not walking in our knowingness, which is what will call us to work. And we have backtracked a little. We got a little too comfortable. My grandmother would say, we're so free now, we're full. And we got a little too comfortable. And so now it is time to, in Islam, we say to get back on our deen. So that is to get back onto our spiritual paths, to know who we are. And our responsibility is to each other. And so when we're coming into our different communities, what do we need to do to make us better, to elevate, to progress? No matter where we are, that's our mission. Where we show up, where we where when I came here from Georgia to Flagstaff, I knew that it was to continue the work, and the work is whatever needed to be done to uplift, to progress the community in which I exist in. So we already know it does not change wherever we are. That is our responsibility. And if you've brought those gifts with you, or if you're still developing your gifts, and that's the beauty of the collective, the community, to identify, okay, here's someone, maybe right now they don't seem like a strong leader, but it's our responsibility to help nurture that, because we see that they have that potential. And so we support and nurture that person. So no matter where you go, the mission never changes, the assignment, it never changes, no matter where you are in the world. The location changes and the characters change, but the challenges, I promise you, will always be the same. But the assignment remains the same, and that is to be a servant. And I love what Yeshua said. He said, let the greatest among you be the servant of all. For whoever makes himself great shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be made great. Doesn't change no matter where you are. We nurture, and the expectation is that you should be nurtured. Does that answer?
Absolutely, beautifully so. Thank you. Well, we are coming up to the hour for this session, and I want to be mindful and respectful of everyone's time. So I want to close us out with one last question that takes us back to that idea of Kwanzaa 365 days a year. We've talked throughout this celebration about how we can commit ourselves and commit our community to embracing these principles throughout the entire year. It's not just a 7-day celebration, but it's something that we can be doing all 365 days of the year. So I'm curious to know, rather than the traditional New Year's resolutions that we know most of us fail within a matter of weeks, if not days, what are each of you committing to in your life or as part of your community in living the 7 principles of Kwanzaa all year? What's one thing that you would say that you can do this year to live out one of the principles, or your favorite principle, or whatever that looks like for you? I'll start with you, Ms. Bernadine.
I think I've been saying this every Kwanzaa, or at least something close to it, and that is to support the community. To be here, to continue in service, to help grow and nurture the individual and the whole. Because in doing that, we progress, we elevate, we create the promised land.
Beautiful. Dr. Allen?
So I have so many things running in my mind, and I should have known you were going to ask this question. I should have known this. But what I have been thinking about is the legacy and the preparation that we leave behind. How are our kids being prepared? And kid can be anybody, right? So anybody who is not actively engaged, anyone from a generation beneath my, or after mine. How are we preparing this next generation, this next cadre of brilliant humans who will launch from what we have left? And so I've been thinking about this a lot for the last couple of weeks. And so what this requires of us is two things. Is that one, we must actively be loving on ourselves in ways that we have not done because we are so driven by a capitalistic system or a system that tells us, that fills our minds, via media and everything else, with all these things that really aren't important. I think if the last 2 years have taught us nothing at all, is that we can live with a lot less and be just as productive, right? Um, so it requires us to love on ourselves in ways that we have not dared to do so, because it would mean that we would be labeled as lazy or not willing, um, or even problematic, or not the authority in an area. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it requires us to see beyond ourselves, which, watch this, means that I have to be more aware of who I am. In order for me to actually help someone else, I have to be able to see beyond just Treya's existence. But also, to do this, I have to be aware of all my gifts, all my talents. Where am I not living up to my own potential? Because when I radically dare to be myself, to love on myself, I am influencing other people. And it allows me to then think beyond just my needs and to consider those around me. And so, quite simply put, I think that the way that I'm going to do this is to get back on the watchtower, right? So this is one of my favorite scriptures in the Bible, and the significance of this is the watchman is watching out for dangers and opportunities. And have I really been doing that? I think somewhat, right? But has it been as intentional as it could be? And by me being on my post, that launches this next generation so that they are not having to fight battles that I can prevent by being in place. Wherever that place is, whether it is career, whether it is I'm supposed to say something, or I feel the unction to love on someone, as long as I am in position, we can guarantee that this next generation can launch instead of make war.
Beautiful. Miss Deb?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm gonna go to Ujima. That's the principle that always sticks with me and stays with me. So when you asked me to do that one, it was like, oh my goodness, this is perfect. And so I think that for me, because I believe so strongly in the collective working responsibility, I think I said the other night that I believe this is key to our survival, and not just the African diaspora race of people, but I think for all of us, that collective working responsibility, because I really do feel unless we figure this out, we are doomed, as a group of people, or as a human species. And I have faith that we will, like I said, not in probably my lifetime, but the young people that are coming after us are so much more aware, and just like Dr. Allen said, to for all of us to be watchful and to try and remove those stumbling blocks so that they can have a smoother path, so that they can do that collective work that is required for all of our survival. So that's the principle I would take, that I would embrace.
Thank you. And Dr. Evans?
So, first of all, I want to just go back to something that Dr. Allen said, um, because I was sitting here thinking that a dry well can give water to no one. And I think that that's a very good reminder for all of us about that concept. Um, and so I don't do New Year's resolutions. I don't think that we should be in the trap of thinking that once a year we have the opportunity to start something new or to change something in our lives or whatnot. You know, I do sit down on the eve of my birthday, and I think about, what's a strategic plan, what's a strategic direction for me going forward for the next, for the next year, if I'm lucky enough to have gained another year, right, to be here on Earth. What is it that I want to do? Um, when I sit here tonight and I just think about the seven principles of Kwanzaa, what I really got from tonight is that in order to have faith, you have to know where you come from. You have to be really rooted. You have to know who you are, right? To be able to then step out in faith and walk in faith and do things in faith. And I think it was also said, I think this was also Dr. Allen, where, you have the current generation or the newer generation that says, I'm not my parents or I'm not my grandparents, right? And they just have like, that just, yeah, right? And it's because of everything that our ancestors did, you know, um, from the beginning, not just in the civil rights era, but all the way back even before they got here, right? We come from kings and queens and doctors and attorneys and farmers and engineers. We came from that. Our history didn't just start here. It didn't just start with slavery. It didn't just start in the Civil War era. Our history goes all the way back. So I guess for me, what I'm taking away from tonight is that I'm going to walk in that along this path that I seem to be on. And I'm going to make sure that I have the opportunity to sit and listen to everyone else's story. Because I think what Miss Deb said is also key, right? We are here celebrating Kwanzaa. Um, there's a perception that Kwanzaa is a Black holiday, right? And it really unites us and it really ties together the African diaspora. But quite frankly, our history is everybody's history, and our history is American history. And it's going to take all of us to address the current issues that we have and to move our entire country, if not our entire race, forward, right? And I think that that's important. One of the things I posted on Facebook yesterday was the fact that when I started last year, I had 6 miles on my car. And when I ended last year, I had close to 18,000 on my car because I had the opportunity to travel all over Northern Arizona and talk to different people. So I'm going to continue to do that, to collect those stories, to hear those stories, to share whatever insight or wisdom that I have with people, and to also gain information and wisdom back, right? Because I'm going to gain that information, I'm going to bring it back to my community, and I'm going to share it and see what gets sown from those seeds, both ways, right? So I guess I'm going to be a pollinator and a gardener, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us tonight and for sharing your stories, your wisdom, your commitments to our community, and the lessons that I think the entire community can take from that going into this new year. For the community that's joining us, I invite you to share in our commitment to community, to who you are, and recognizing who you are, recognizing what you know and what you don't know. I encourage you to keep joining us. That might be your commitment going into the new year, is to keep joining these sessions and learning more about the history of this community, the history of our nation, and finding those different ways that you can step into those stories and help to bolster the community that you're part of. We remind you that these sessions are currently housed on the Murdoch Community Center. However, effective now, going into 2022, we are moving to the Live Black Community Experience Facebook page. And that's where these stories will be coming from. So we encourage you to go now, if you haven't already, follow that page, make sure you're subscribed so that you see notifications of when these sessions are going live. Keep learning, keep engaging, keep finding ways to be of service to your community. And with that, we encourage you to enjoy the new year, celebrate today, plan for tomorrow, and as always, go in grace.